Hi everyone, I'm going to show you one option of something you could do when you're trying to figure out how to do physical distancing team building games with your participants. So back when I used to be a ropes course director, it was out in the woods. We used to have people walk a little ways from the parking lot to the course. So I would have a bucket with each person's name on it that was going to be in that program that day. And then everything that they needed for the day was going to be inside the bucket. And then this bucket also became a really cool chair, so then when we needed to sit and debrief and do things like that, then they had a place to sit, but then also they could put all of their own personal belongings in here, things like that. So I think now when we are in this age of trying to do team building from 6 feet apart and do more physical distancing, here are some things that I have put on the inside that I think would work really well for physical distancing team building. So take the lid off. So of course everybody needs to stay hydrated, so everybody would have their water bottle in here. You could even have get everybody a small thing of hand sanitizer as well. I also have writing utensils, markers of different colors, so that way if people need to write something down, they have their own individual colors. Another thing I have in here is a tarp. Now, when we were together with facilitators trying to do this, this is a 6 foot by 8 foot tarp. And one thing that we found is that because as human beings we're so used to being really close to other people, we had a hard time physical distancing even as facilitators, and we know better. So what I decided that I think we'll do is, if we look down here on the floor, I've got a tarp here on the floor. So if everybody had their own tarp, then when your groups, when everybody has one small tarp, then I can make sure that my tarp is far enough away from somebody else's tarp. So if I'm doing different activities, I can make sure that as long as I have a space that I need to stay within, that really helped me be able to have a spot marker to where I would stay 6 feet apart from somebody else if I had boundaries on the ground. Another option that you could do is just painter's tape on the floor or something like that. But without the boundaries, we were finding that we were getting a lot closer to one another than 6 feet. Another thing that you could do is even just use small webbing pieces or something, or this is parachute cord. And if everybody had a spot to stand in, then they could put their spots around as well. And then that helped keep the distance of 6 feet apart from one another. So let's come in a little closer and see what some other things that I have in here. So I do have some large jumbo, these are foam playing cards that I found when I was doing some work with a water sports group. And so I figured whatever props that they need for any of the games that I want to do, these also float in water, which are really fun. So you could have them, if you work paddleboarding or anything like that, you could have them face down on the water and then they could come over and they could flip them over with their paddles and things like that. But they also work well if you want to do team building games where they mix them up and they don't know what card they have, and then they have to put their card to their forehead. Think different activities like group blackjack, poker face, different things like that. So, and I would have everything individually bagged in their bucket, so that way then they have just different, they can pull out, when I give them instructions of things they need to pull out, they can. Now another idea is just to give everybody a deck of playing cards. You can pick them up at a dollar store for next to nothing, and then that just is something that everybody goes home with. But everybody has their own deck. We also at Training Wheels, we have the stack the deck cards, which are laminated. So the nice thing about laminated is that you can disinfect it afterwards. So these particular decks, it's playing cards on one side, and then on the other side, you've got an icebreaker question, a photo, and then this little black box here is for an activity called 52 card pickup. I don't think that game is gonna work for social distancing, but the processing and the icebreaker questions and all of the playing card activities would. So, so you could either pull out 5 cards for each person and stick it in there, in their buckets, or you could give them each a laminated deck if you wanted to. So another thing that I would put in here is I have icebreaker questions if you wanted to not do the stack the deck cards. But everything in here is laminated so that I can wipe it down later. But because normally how I would do this activity is I would have everybody have one card, and then they would go find a partner, they would ask each other the questions, then they would trade cards and then go find a new partner. But instead of trading cards, just give everybody 4 or 5 cards. And so then after they've done with one question, they just flip it to the back and then they ask the next question of the next partner. And if we were all standing on different mats, I can still have a conversation with somebody that's 6 feet away from me, but we're keeping our distance and still having good question prompts. You can do the same thing for debriefing questions as well. Another thing I have in here are spot it cards. I have several different spot it games that would work well for social distancing or physical distancing. But again, I've laminated everything so that way, and then again, instead of just giving each person one card and having them trade them, just give them 4 or 5 cards out of the deck, and then they, for the different games, they can just move on to the second card. Another thing that I have in here is I pulled out a couple numbers from my key punch deck. So if I wanted them to each have a specific number, then you could pull the different discs, the different number discs out of here. And if I had a group of 20, then each person could have 1 or 2 of them in their buckets ready to go. Another thing you could do is just laminate different picture cards for processing and things like that. These here I've got double-sided, so that way you've got different pictures that you could use on the fronts. You could also use the backs, different things like that. Another thing you could do is I've laminated all my word circle puzzles, and then I put each word circle puzzle on a key ring. So that way I can keep them separate, and then I put them on a carabiner to keep them all together. So these are just those splitter rings that, that you would use to put through a 3-ring binder. So I just punch a hole in my word circle puzzles, and then I color code them so I know just by looking at them quickly, and I can say, go find your yellow cards or go find your green cards, and then they can be working on their individual mats with with their word circle puzzles. Other things you can put in here is just different, these are 15-foot long pieces of parachute cord, so that way they can make their own circles, things like that. Let's see, in here I also have small processing and debriefing activities in here. I've got a small body part debrief on charms. We carry these on the Training Wheels website. They're body part keychains is what they're called. I also have some little red, yellow, and green stoplight, because I use that for behaviors we need to stop doing, things we need to be careful of, things that we're doing really well. So you can have built-in processing tools right in here. I also include a little instruction sheet, so that way it is clear on what I would like them to be processing or the metaphor that I'd like them to do. You can also put different squares or markers in here, so that way then if I need additional places to throw them on the floor and people stand on them on the floor, then these also fit. These are nice plastic canvas, so they can go right into a bucket of bleach or bleach water or something like that, or spray them down with some bleach spray water afterwards if I wanted to. I also have, you could put in here one of the pages from the Zoom activity. Now the Zoom book is a great activity that you can do where I laminated all of mine, and so after you laminate them, you take the binding off, but this activity can be a really great communications activity, and I'll describe this in a little bit more detail in this session itself. But you could stick one page from the Zoom activity in each person's bucket. Another activity you could do is what I call the other side. And this is a great activity to talk about perspective, where if I were standing, I would describe my side of the story with a partner, and they would describe the other side, what they see. So if I was standing on one tarp and my partner was standing on the line over here, then I could describe what I see on my side, they would describe what they see on their side, and then together we would try to figure out what is going on in the story. That's a cool activity. And then I have some webbing in here, things like that. So again, if I wanted to create lines on the ground, or a circle where I wanted them to make a spot marker. I also have some index cards in here, so that way people, if I wanted to do word circle puzzles on the fly and give everybody one word in the moment, I could. Or if they wanted to write down questions or different things like that, just good to have a little stack of index cards. And then also sticky notes. Everybody has their own little small sticky note pad. Then they could write on this, and then you can go stick it up on a question board or something like that. And then last but not least, I have a small piece of webbing in here that you could use for a little activity I called a forget-me-not. So with their permanent marker that they would have in here as well, they could write at the very end of the day, what is something that I don't want to forget about this experience that we had today. And then after they write down that phrase or whatever it is, they tie it in a knot, they take that home with them, and it becomes their forget-me-not. So those are just an example of some things that you could put into a participant bucket, all activities I think that you could do with physical distancing team building.